It's because of 15 years of austerity, of a country which has cut back on Sure Start, cut back on people's ability to look after themselves when they have no work, has increased the level of social insecurity. So many people don't feel that they belong, they have a role, they have an anger. How do we tackle that?
Well, let's speak now to Labour MP Clive Lewis. Clive, good afternoon.
Good afternoon there.
Thanks very much for speaking to us. First of all, then, some of the comments from the Prime Minister, who describes far-right thuggery, and they're going to feel the full force of the law, the people who are taking part in these riots. Far-right thuggery, does that include everyone, in your view, that is out on the streets protesting and, yes, rioting?
Far-right thuggery is one description, but the issue I think many people will have about simply criminalizing these individuals is that you're dealing with the symptoms. You're not actually dealing with the cause of the problem. And the cause is multifaceted. I'm not going to sit here and say that I know every single reason why this is happening, but there are some which I think are less easy to engage with, especially because they make us hold up a mirror to our own society. We're a country that has for years now been using a narrative in the mainstream media, politicians in Parliament, about stop the boats, about hostile environment, hierarchies of racism. There's been open Islamophobia in parties, in government, in Parliament. This sets a tone and it creates a petri dish in which the far right, their ideas can thrive and prosper. And every time you try to triangulate against a more and more extreme agenda, you start talking about deportations to Rwanda, and they will start talking about throwing people back into the sea. It will just escalate. And at some point, we all have to take responsibility for the structural racism that is endemic within our society. It's not me just wishing that was the truth. It is, because, we're part of our history. And I think now we have this kind of moral panic about what's happening, quite justified given what they're trying to do: burn down asylum seeker hostels, burn down streets, smash windows, pogroms, in effect. Yes, we should be concerned about that and we should act. But acting on that bit alone, on the symptoms alone, won't solve the deeper problems that we have in this country.
It sounds like you would, I suppose, value this opportunity for something of a reckoning for all political parties, by the sound of it, Clive, including the Labour Party, of course, the party of
Including
government
the media.
now. And yeah, sure, fair, absolutely fine. What should that look like? What does the Labour government need to recognise at this point, if indeed there has been a sort of triangulation to a more extreme agenda, as you put it, for too long?
Moments of crisis like this also offer opportunity. They offer an opportunity when people are shocked, when people do want to see change, when people are looking at the issue, looking at where it can lead. And I think we'd be very silly to think that this is going to end here. It may stop here for a short period. Some of them may go to prison, but increasingly, because of lots of mechanisms, more people will be radicalized, more people will end up, and maybe the next time this happens, it'll be bigger and worse. We don't know. But what this is an opportunity to do now, whilst it's happening, is to have a conversation, an honest conversation about who we are as a country, where we want to go, what we want to look like, and what we want our relationship to be with ourselves, with each other, and the world. What's our position going to be on immigration, on human rights? Let's have those discussions, those debates. Let's put to bed some of this rhetoric, which I think, and language, which has created an environment where far-right ideas begin to permeate, begin to ground themselves. So that would mean us actually holding a mirror up and saying, how do we deal with structural racism? How do we deal with the racism in our workplaces, the racism in the police, the racism in politics? Now, that isn't going to happen over 6 months, a year, or 5 years. It's an ongoing process. But until we acknowledge that it is part of the reason why this is happening, all we'll ever do is deal with the symptoms, and that will not be enough. And I think that's a big problem. So we have to basically, first of all, acknowledge that the liberal racism in our society, the racism, the everyday racism that we see and sometimes turn away from, the language of politicians, of hostile environment, of stop the boats, of seeing people in Gaza. I think people sometimes feel government sees them as slightly less human than other people. Then that has to stop, because that sends signals, and we have to engage with those issues. And that's a longer term project. And that's the kind of political leadership I want to see from Keir Starmer and a Labour government, leading that discussion, leading that debate, and following on with legislation, following on with cultural change in this country. It will be an ongoing long-term process, but you have to acknowledge, we have to acknowledge that something has gone wrong, is going wrong, and there is a long-term problem in this country in how we deal with race issues.
Yeah, so let's try to unpack that a little then, Clive, because there are people on these on the streets over the last week that are holding signs that say "Stop the boats, send them home," etc. Are those people's beliefs invalid at this point?
No one's look. Everyone is entitled to their views. How you then?
So how do you engage with that?
How do you act on that? Well, so first of all, I've seen right-wing bloggers walking down streets where these riots have been saying, "Look at this. Look at the disgrace of this poverty. Look at no wonder these people are rioting." Okay, well, why do you think that is? It's because of 15 years of austerity. Of a country which has cut back on Sure Start, cut back on people's ability to look after themselves when they have no work, has increased the level of social insecurity. So many people don't feel that they belong, they have a role, they have an anger. How do we tackle that? How do we deal with that?
Well, how do you tackle that?
So first of all, you invest in public services. I gave a speech in the King's Speech. I said, if you want to be able to pull the rug from under the far right, give people a sense of belief in themselves, give our country something to aim and to strive for, a sense of purpose. And let's talk about who we are as a country, where we want to go. We're a sixth wealthiest country in the world. Let's make sure some of that wealth is distributed out. Let's invest in public services, invest in the NHS, invest in those institutions that are going to promote democracy, empowerment of communities, give people a sense of belonging. At the moment, there are too many people, too many communities that have been absolutely kicked around. Not just all types of working class people have been kicked about, they're angry and they're annoyed. And that is the environment in which the far right propagate. They poke and they prod and they blow on the flames of that anger and resentment. So that's a starting place of something we can do. Invest in the future of this country. And that means a fairer society. It also means one that invests in people and communities. I'm hoping that's what a Labour government is going to do. That's a starting point. The other point is, look, there are people like me who will say, if we can take the racism out of our immigration system, so we can have an immigration and asylum system fit for the 21st century, which is a decent system. Look, I'm not talking about open borders, but I'm talking about having a system where we take out the racism, we acknowledge the racism that has been implicit in our immigration policy for decades, since Windrush, in effect, with a panic of, oh my God, we've got thousands of black people coming into the country and they're subjects as well. They've got every right. We thought it was just going to be Australians and Canadians and New Zealanders and Rhodesians that were coming into the country. But now there are thousands of West Indians coming. My God, we've got to change the immigration system. That's been pretty much the narrative of our immigration system for the last 60 or 70 years. This has to change. Immigration has been a good and positive force. Yes, there are difficulties, but that isn't because of the immigrants. That's because when we color, we enable that racism to flourish. We take away from working class communities. We impose austerity. We give people rubbish jobs, crap housing. These are the things which fan the flames of that. So let's have a proper, grown-up, humane immigration and asylum system. Let's be really clear about how you can come to this country with safe routes. Let's be clear about the kind of people that we are wanting to welcome in, to say, look, there are jobs here to do. We're training our own people, but there are jobs here that we need to do without simply taking from those countries their best and brightest. Yeah. So look, there's a whole range of issues that we could do so much better, but don't.
Time is somewhat against us, Clive, but I want to put this question to you that's actually been posed by one of our listeners, Barry, who asked, is Britain a multicultural society or a series of monocultures? How would you answer that?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to define multicultural and monocultural. I mean, this isn't a monoculture. I mean,
But is it a series of monocultures, he says?
Well, tell me, but what is monoculture? I mean, culture is a collection of what is British culture? Tell me what British culture is. Tell me what British culture was in 1945 before Windrush. It's a culture that had influences from the Indian subcontinent, from Africa, from Empire, from South Africa, the culture is constantly changing, constantly in flux. It has influences from the United States, influences from Europe. You know, it hasn't been created in an isolated bubble as a monoculture that is somehow pure. This notion, culture is constantly changing, constantly refreshing, constantly updating. And I just think this notion that there are these kind of monolithic cultures all over that suddenly clash with each other. It's a very negative, very two-dimensional view of what culture is and can be.